Robert Sparrow is Professor of Philosophy at Monash University in Melbourne and
one of the world's leading applied ethicists working at the intersection of technology and human life. Over more than 2 decades, he's written with exceptional rigor on robot ethics, AI in healthcare, autonomous weapon systems, the moral status of artificial systems, and most recently, the implications of AI-generated emulations by deceased people. He's been pretty busy. His work is notable for a persistent willingness to follow philosophical arguments wherever they lead, even when the conclusions are genuinely uncomfortable. And we're taking seriously the question that many were thinking: what does it mean to live well alongside the machines we are building and creating today? So I want to dive straight into it, that's okay. Thank you so much for joining. It's very front of mind, AI. The last few weeks, I saw the US government put an export ban on an AI tool it deemed to be too powerful. We're seeing in the UK just today, social media being banned for sort of children under 16. So I think there's a lot of interest in how we relate to technology and AI in particular. And you've been working on this for 20 years or so, and a lot of people are perhaps only coming to it in the last few years. So it's a very unfair question. But what have you seen as the fundamental shifts over the last 20 years in what you've been researching?
So a lot of things that I was interested in as thought experiments are now real issues. So I was originally interested in the way that thinking about robots or intelligent machines allowed me to present people with scenarios that they could understand, where you say, this has got some features of a person, but not others. How does that change the way we think about friendship or moral standing? And then I became interested in autonomous weapon systems. I saw an advertisement in a military magazine that said, this bomb can think before it acts. And I thought, well, if that were true, and I wrote one of the first papers on autonomous weapon systems, but the tech was really fantasy at that stage. We're talking late 90s, early 2000s. And then it caught up. The things that people had been fantasizing about came real. So massive change in the technology, massive change in the reception of doing philosophy about this. I really struggled to get papers on robot ethics accepted to good philosophy journals. And AI, which is, there's a much longer history of philosophers writing about AI. It was hard to get people to take applied ethics about seriously. And now, of course, everybody. And then I guess the other thing is the chatbots, the ability to pass the Turing test, I guess. And that's been fascinating to see how these machines have passed the Turing test and almost nobody concluded that they could think. Decades and decades of people writing about whether the Turing test was a good test for the question, can machines think? When machines passed it, almost nobody concluded that they could think. That was really interesting as well. So, but just the fact that we're now relating to AI on a daily basis, it was really hard to imagine when I started writing. Even a decade ago, if you told me that machines would be capable of what they're now capable of and have left howling in that regard.
I think, a lot of things that were science fiction relatively short time ago, that's right, we're science facts now, I guess. Do you find, or do you think that the technology has advanced quicker than I'm not sure what the right word is really, than our ability as a society to understand and really know what it means? It feels that technology is advancing every day, every hour, and not necessarily with the same speed of governance, ethics, moral compass that we might have needed with lots of other things.
I mean, that's an easy one. The answer is just yes, and very, very, very clearly. I mean, still seems to me that people to properly understand what the internet meant, or think about the way people thought that, social media would turn us all into citizen journalists. You would have this fast flourishing of democracy. It seems to me political circumstances we live in today are much more reactionary than they were before we had the internet. Social media in general, it seems to me that we are conducting a vast experiment on human beings all over the planet. We're still arguing about what the impact on the developing brain is of using mobile phones. Takes a long while for people to understand the impacts of technology, prone to a whole series of what seem to be quite obvious mistakes when it comes to the way that they think about technology. And so, no, we are really a long way behind understanding what it means. And, there's also so much money involved that people are inclined to, be selling you something instead of thinking seriously about it. There's a long history of thought about AI and robotics, which is really not about the machines at all, but about what it means to be human. I think that actually has served us quite poorly when we come to thinking about AI today. If you think about the number of people who, if you mention robot ethics, they say, oh, we need 3 laws of robotics or 4 laws of robotics, or, depending on where in Asimov you got up to. But if you know anything about that history, these were not theory suggestions for robot ethics. They were a structure for hanging stories. And people still take them seriously as really robots. So much of what people have said historically about machines is really about their anxieties about socialism or race politics or, changes in gender relations. And so the legacies that we're drawing on when we try to understand these technologies are not fit for purpose in some ways. And still the case that so much of what people say about AI is really about art or really about our fears of social change. At the same time, we have this very real technology that we need to try to understand, and we need to think about, what it means for the future and especially for the distribution of political power in the future. And I just think we're doing very well. And you can kind of see that because can find, half a dozen people, they've all got PhDs from Stanford and MIT, and they will all tell you completely different things about this stuff. And that suggests to me is that we are basically clueless when it comes to, what the future looks like with this technology.
I think that is one of the challenges in a way. And I haven't come across a technology where you get so many educated, intelligent, incredibly knowledgeable people that have completely opposite views. You have some people that are incredibly well read and well respected, whatever, saying that they believe AI has a form of consciousness, has own sentience. Other people say, no, that's absolutely not. That's absolutely nonsense. So as a person on the street, where are you supposed to go to find out the truth?
I mean, I don't think there's any easy answer to that. I think that you should pay attention to, where the money is and who is,
This one's not big there.
who is stands to gain from having you believe what they are saying. I think that you should take everything that anyone says with a large grain of salt, And you should be aware that as one of my favorite sort of, I guess it's an epigraph or saying, nothing so stupid that you can't find a professor somewhere who believes it. And the fact that someone incredibly, is a Nobel Prize winning scientist doesn't mean that they know anything about politics or history. And that means that their speculation about the future is actually not any better than anyone else's. Like you can have a lot of expertise in one area and still be profoundly uneducated when it comes to social science or philosophy or economics. So when people are talking about the future, often neglecting lessons from other disciplines. But, that goes for me if I can't tell you how these machines work, for instance, and vast chunks of mathematics and computer science that I am more or less completely ignorant of. What I do know, the history of technology and arguments about technology, I think that expertise is worth something. At the same time, you can have the professor of mechatronics up on stage and they start talking about computer ethics or the ethics of AI or what the implications of these technologies are for employment. And what you should think to yourself is actually the fact that you're a computer scientist, bravo, you don't know anything about that other stuff. So there's an important thing to understand here is just how broad the expertise that people need to have to think well about the future. And again, you back the history of what people have said about what the future looks like, and it's pretty hopeless. Where's my flying car? Where's my rocket? Hello, where's my holiday house on the moon? There's so much of what people thought about what the world we would be living in today was radically wrong. You've also got to think about what counts as fundamental change here. So for all the sort of magical technology that I have available to me today, my life actually looks remarkably similar to my father's life. I live in the suburbs in a nuclear family, borrow money from the bank, drive to work in an office in a car, like flying airplanes to go overseas. Amount of social and political change from, say, 1890 to 1910 was massively greater than the amount of changing people's daily lives around the world in that period was much greater than the difference in Australia, for instance, between 1990 and 2010. So for all the information technology, all the computer technology, all that magical stuff, almost nothing changed in terms of people's day-to-day life. So, okay, we all started communicating on email, and we didn't have travel agents anymore. The fundamental gender relations, economic relations, social and political structures were pretty much unchanged. Something like the steam engine, antibiotics, shipping containers, very old school technologies, actually had much brighter social and impacts than any of the computing technology that we're seeing here. So again, it's just people need to think about what matters when you're thinking about the future. You need to think, great, so now, I can do a video call with anyone all over the world. Seems pretty amazing. My day-to-day is actually pretty much the same as my father's. There's a sort of question of the grain of analysis here, or what matters when you're thinking about the impacts of technology, and trying to think people's ordinary lives, people's social relationships people are in, concentrating on those may help to retain a little bit of a sense of groundedness in the face of all the, frankly amazing stuff that is also changing around us. Now, of course, if AI and robotics really do put, 80% of people out of work, then that wouldn't be radical to get social and political change. So you can find very different opinions on those matters.
Definitely. So something you touched on there, a lot of things, but one of the things is around social relationships. I know you've written extensively, and I read your paper, Against Imaginary Friends, What Digital Companions and Their Solution to Social Isolation. It's obviously super interesting, but so one of the points you raise is that whilst AI interactions may reduce loneliness, they have no impact on social isolation. And I want to not to challenge you, but to sort of say, is there not an inherent benefit in reducing loneliness in and of itself? Because I guess the social isolation is much more a fact that we're now living in single person households, nuclear families. We don't have extended, we don't have family nearby. My wife's from Melbourne, she lives in London now. Her family's thousands of miles away. So is there not a benefit in using AI to reduce loneliness, or is that a negative as well?
Pinpointly miserable.
Yeah.
And so if there is a prima facie, it's good for people to feel less lonely.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that when you are thinking about, when you reach that conclusion, what you should think to yourself, if I could take a pill that would do this, would I celebrate it? Okay. So people get very excited about the kind of AI companion, robots pretending to be your friends. What matters is how I feel, not whether a machine genuinely me. If you want to say, well, look, what matters, how I feel, what you should think is, well, if someone just gave you a drug, okay, bit of heroin, bit of ecstasy, tossing in some antidepressants and some beta blockers, very happy pill. You sat at home by yourself with no one talking to you, didn't feel lonely because you were, in la la land, or you were just doped up to the eyeballs. Would you think that was a good technology? Just put it in a drinking bottle. If you're going to say no there, because say, well, that's not real, or it would be bad for people because now they won't go and, try to meet people because they're not lonely anymore, then you should say the same things about the AI companions and the robots. Now, of course, the other part of this story is to think about the role that loneliness, why people feel lonely. And part of that is it's an alert system that tells you that you are not getting what you need in terms of social interaction. So that loneliness and social isolation are connected insofar as loneliness is a sign that you're not happy with your existing social networks. And ideally, that then provokes you to try to make some, go out and meet some people and make some new friends and address the question of social isolation. If I don't feel lonely because I'm talking to the bot,
mm-hmm.
and I don't go out and meet anyone, because social isolation is bad for you, that's ultimately bad for you as well. So, when people say, wouldn't it be better if I genuinely can't, if I'm genuinely socially isolated and I can't change that,
yeah.
wouldn't it be better if I felt less lonely? And maybe once you've already stipulated that there's really no alternative, that there's no possibility of social workers coming to take you out of the house, or there's no possibility of forming social networks, then maybe it's that people aren't lonely. But by the same token, it would be better if they just took a pill the kind of the relationships that we have with AI, they're fake. They're genuine relationships. That's a world of illusion. In the same way that the, happy thoughts I get when I take the happy pill are real. So I essentially think we should see those two things as essentially morally equivalent. If you're someone who thinks it's a good idea that we dock people up once they're socially isolated so they don't feel miserable, then you should be happy to give them all robot friends. But if you're someone who thinks, oh, hang on, that's not a great solution, doping people up just so they don't feel miserable, then you should also reject the robot friends.
It's a bit like the, is it Nozick, the experience machine?
Well, it's very much, it's Nozick, it's, the Matrix, red, pink, blue. And the question here is whether you think it matters that your relationships are real or not, or whether you have an accurate understanding of the world around you. I think people often pretend that they don't care. But if it was revealed to them that their, wife of 30 years was actually just being paid by their parents for flying about them, I don't think that didn't matter. Happy. But yeah, I mean, I guess like most people, if they discover that their partner has been having an affair and hasn't loved them for the last 5 years, I don't think, well, that didn't matter because I thought she loved me. Well, what they think is, well, no, my life has been a fraud, and I wouldn't have stayed, and they feel deeply betrayed. Which is to say, that people care not just about the way they think the world is, but they care about the way the world actually is. And for that reason, I think building machines to encourage people to be deluded about their relationship with the machines profoundly unethical. These systems like Replica, which is, AI companion.
Yeah.
They're designed to manipulate us, and they're designed to deceive us. And that relationship, doing that strikes me as being quite unethical. The business model here is convince people that they have something that they don't have. These machines don't care about us. They're not really our friends. And encouraging people to believe that they are strikes me as being quite unethical.
It's a bit like, remember the film years ago with Jim Carrey, The Truman Show? Well, he's the only person that doesn't know he's actually acting in his entire life since he's been born has been beamed out to everybody else, and his wife, his friends, his parents, whatever. They're all actors, paid actors. But for him, he's loving the life he's living until he realizes that it isn't a real life. And suddenly everything he believed that was making him happy and was giving him joy just becomes meaningless. But see, you talk there about there's morally negative to create machines that form these relationships. So what do you think about the notion of the care system for people suffering from dementia, or people that perhaps, and I think I know the answer, but people that don't have the capacity to know that the emotional attachment they're creating isn't real, that they are being deceived, but so my mum died of dementia a couple of years ago. And one of the things that my dad found really hard was answering the same question 20 times or repeating the same story over and over again. The thought of having it doesn't exist, but an AI care bot that could answer those questions, share the same stories, being photographed, all that sort of stuff. I don't know whether I would feel bad about that, because mum would have known it was a fake. So if somebody doesn't know, is it still as ethically and morally uncomfortable?
I mean, I ask again, how do you feel about just doping her up so that she felt that those questions were being answered, so that, she was hallucinating a happy world or hallucinating the answers to those questions. Morally speaking, it seems to me these are exactly the same.
Mm.
If you don't care whether or not the experience is genuine or not, then the pharmaceutical solution often seems to be much more readily available. People now, to be frank, there's a lot of drugging of going on in the aged care sector. Yeah, gobbling antidepressants and tranquilizers, and often necessarily prescribe these drugs for reasons that are not necessarily about their own self-interest, narrowly described. Maybe in some sense it's in people's interest if they are less disruptive in the aged care setting. Yes. First thing to ask is just, okay, if you're going to admit that someone doesn't have the capacity to tell the difference, and you're willing to pacify them, consider drugs. A lot of, again, a small percentage of the audience here will say, yep, no, that's right, we should just, but notice the kind of relationship that you are establishing with your parent. The way in which you are just treating them as a problem to be solved, and not both ends of that relationship matter. People often reflect on the years they have spent caring for someone in those circumstances and understand that as a personal journey, where they may have done well, they may have done poorly, they have learned various things along the way. None of that will be true if we just shut our parents up with robots, or we just pump the room full of laughing gas, or whatever it is. The other thing to consider opposite end of life. I used to think, there's very interesting and profound parallels between the circumstances of people in advanced old age and people in infancy.
Yeah.
Both ends of the human life cycle, we are essentially helpless. We need other people. We need to be cared for by other people, and we're not sort of fully autonomous agents. Okay, so the standard sort of philosophical models of people just don't work. Think about infancy. You've got to be in society. You need people around you. Human beings don't kind of spring from the ground like mushrooms. They kind of develop in the context of loving relationships. That's also true, ideally, for the advanced old age. To have a decent advanced old age, you need to be surrounded by people who care, look after your needs, etc. I used to think it was pretty straightforward. No one was developing robots for kindergartens, infancy. Now, actually, interestingly, people are starting to do that. But the public's response to the idea that you would just leave your baby with a robot is very different from the public's response to the idea that you would leave your parent with a robot. And that's interesting. People need to take that seriously. If we think that it's okay to kind of outsource something that is pretending to be care to the machines, one end of life, one at the other end of life. But if some busy mother said, look, I don't have time to read again, now there are robots reading children bedtime stories, but most people's response to that is to think that's nightmarish. The parents are missing an opportunity to care. They will bitterly regret not spending that time with their child. And it's a form of neglect and abuse. I suspect that that's what we should think about the same option in advanced old age. There's also a political element to this stuff. If you ask people in aged care settings what they want and need, they never say robots. They never say AI. If you ask people in gerontology or aged care nursing, what do you need? They never say robots or AI. There's a very tiny percent of people in those fields who kind of glommed on to the fact that you can publish a whole lot about robots, if you embrace this. But the day-to-day people working in that sector, they say, we need more staff. We need more funding. We need people to be less ageist. We need to try to develop an inclusive society, a society where people aren't kind of warehoused in advanced old age. They never say, we want this. The people who are developing this tech are young, fit engineers who are really actually they just want to build cool robots. And in fact, the history of these aged care robots is they all fail. There's no market for any of this. There's no genuine market for any of this stuff. This might change with the virtual companions, but tech fails, people get bored with it, doesn't update quickly. Someone changes the protocol somewhere and it goes out of date. So when we're also fascinated by the idea that the future of aged care is robots, what we're doing is neglecting the real needs and interests of people in advanced old age. We're not listening to them. But we're embracing a technological fantasy that treats them as a problem to be solved. Again, if you ask people building this tech, is this the future you want for yourself? Of course not. They don't say that. They actually, their imagination is they're going to be cared for by their loving family. You're going to have people looking after them. This is a kind of it's a sort of techno fantasy that is achieved a sort of narrative force by encouraging the idea that older people are this huge problem that needs to be solved, and the solution nowadays is always technology. To be frank, most of this stuff I think is driven by people want to build cool tech. They don't want to do industrial robots or industrial AI because that's not, that boring. They don't want to work for the military. How else can we sell this stuff to
and healthcare?
Aged care crisis, healthcare crisis. I mean, the other really interesting thing to look at here is people will never be upfront and say, we're going to replace aged care workers with machines. They always tell you this story. We're going to supplement this distinct level of care. Okay, you're going to have all the human contacts plus the machines. But at the start of the paper is always a statistic about how we're running out of aged care workers, or there's an aging society. If you take that seriously, the machines are only a solution if they're doing work that we would previously have asked human beings to do. I usually premised on substitution. And so, again, the future people are imagining is a future where people are profoundly socially isolated. This person who used to come and clean the room doesn't turn up anymore because they've been replaced by a machine. The person who used to come and take your temperature doesn't turn up anymore because remote instrument and I seem to check your temperature. This only works as a solution to the sort of looming demographic crisis if it is actually replacing people. Actually, that's part of the way people are selling AI in general. So never start out by saying, is this going to do away. They never turn up at the medical conference and saying, this is going to do away with you. This will do the parts of your job that you hate and leave you to do the stuff that you really care about. I suspect that's almost always nonsense. And this stuff is premised on the idea that it can replace the roles that human beings are doing at the moment.
I mean, we've been very mercenary about it. It only works from a commercial perspective if that is the case. If you're currently paying for 100 staff, and then you're not going to have 100 staff plus 10 robots, you're going to have 90 staff and 10 robots. That's the only way it works viably. But you said before about things haven't changed that much over the last century, and I don't think they have. I think one of the things that has changed is that we've had incredible medical advances that have allowed people to live much longer, but not necessarily much better. That I have real issues with it. I think medically we've been allowed to create these incredible life continuing drugs, treatments, whatever. That means you can live to 100, but nobody cares if the last 20 years of your life are really shit. Actually, why not have an amazing 82 years and die at 82, not try and keep making life longer and longer and longer. So life quality hasn't improved at the same rate as lifespan, which I think is and I think societally you have, sort of parts of Asia still where the parents, grandparents all live with the family and they look after them. It's just part of what they do. And then the same way grandparents look after the children, and it becomes a very nice sort of circular family. Whereas in lots of Western society, we leave home at 18, we pop back every weekend, then every month, then every Christmas, then we forget about our aged parents to a certain extent until they are in care, in need. It's like, oh, they can't come and live with me. I want to go a two-bedroom apartment. What do we get? That's the challenge that we haven't. The Western society very much is about leaving home and spreading our wings, as opposed to lots of other societies, perhaps older societies, have always kept the family as the big unit. So the big change isn't necessarily AI; it's society. But then, how do you change society? That's a much harder question, I guess. One thing I wanted to ask about was using a lot of work on emulations of deceased people, and people hear about grief bots and things, and just share my experience of one. So I was completely nasty. I thought it was terrible. I can't imagine anything worse. That's horrendous. I can't imagine listening to my dead parents or at all. Then, as their parents passed away in the last few years, and you watch TV programs and do recordings and actually create this emulation of a deceased person. And so would it be a bad thing to be able to ring up my dad now and say, oh, Alexander, my son's just finished exams, or mum has passed a driving test, him just say, oh yeah, send my love, send my congratulations. And some people say, well, people need to go through the grieving process as part of human life. I guess my ridiculous question almost would be, why? Why do we need to go through why cannot we continue with it? Because we didn't used to have photographs, videos, whatever. Now we have photographs of people, we have videos of people, we have voice recordings of people. Isn't an AI emulation of a dead parent, a grandparent, the next natural step?
Look, I would resist describing anything in this area as natural. I mean, I think that are all social and political choices. I think the history of technology shows that a lot of things that we now see as being inevitable at the time were completely contingent. And there were examples of people turning away from particular technologies because threatened interests in the workplace, or the cultural change involved in seeing corpses as sources of organs, or objects for dissection was too great. There's more space here for choice than people think. With the emulations, I mean, I wouldn't be too prescriptive about how people should deal with grief or tackle grief. That's not something that I have an enormous amount of experience with or any particular expertise in, I do think that there are some pretty obvious dangers in terms of, for instance, fixing your memory of your aged parent at a particular time in their life. Like when you run the the emulation, you've kind of got a choice. Do I emulate them when they're 20? Do I emulate them when they're 70? But whatever choice you make, they are only part of the story. Only you are essentially distorting your memory. Eventually, all you'll remember interactions that you'd had with this thing that you built. Emulate your parent when they were 60. And you'll forget, when they used to beat you when you were 18, or, the time they left your family, or, whatever, or how loving they were when they were younger and before they became such a crotchety old bastard. I mean, there's any number of distortions that could occur there. If the model itself permitted to evolve, because these things typically train themselves. The more conversations we have with them, the more they train themselves to us. We train to them, they train to us. Again, the relationship you have is not going to be the relationship that you actually had with your parent. So you can see how this would colonize your memory. Now, there's a sense in which some of this stuff happens with photos or letters. And we get snapshot. You just look at the photo that you have, you'll forget the kind of all the times that they weren't photographed. But it is hard not to think that the kind of conversation is going to be a more powerful impact on your memory. And then there's a whole lot of stuff about privacy, advertising, political manipulation of various sorts that people need to be thinking about with these technologies. So maybe some people will find them useful for some time, but I would be pretty nervous about that. But I guess, again, we just, part of this stuff, part of this is empirical. We need to actually look and look and see what happens. We're actually really hopeless. Given that no one can tell you whether playing violent video games makes you more likely to commit acts of violence. That's a technology that we've had for, I don't know, since the 1980s, and you still find one group of people as evidence is clear. After seeing encourage aggression, you find another group of people where the evidence is clear. There's no connection. If we don't know that, and we can't settle that, what are our chances of doing good social science around, around the bots? But if we don't do that, then we are really risking, whole series of bad consequences for people.
I think my fears in that space. One would be that, again, it's the commercial element of it. So what happens if a business goes out of business? You suddenly can't talk to your dead parent, and then suddenly that you're grieving all over again, and so there's that commercial element. And then the second one, and this is run science fiction, I know, but you can imagine Kim Jong-un or Putin uploading themselves into a machine, and when they die, saying, "Well, it's still in charge because it's going to give you the answer I would have given you. So why do you need to change the president or the leader or whatever? Why not have me as your AI version of Putin, Xi Jinping, whoever, Keir Starmer, for goodness sake." But yeah, so it almost becomes, well, you don't need to ever have any more elections because you voted for me and that I'm still here. It's just an AI version of the best version of me, really. It's not one of the greatest hits. And that'd been my science fiction fear, I guess, is that we end up with a government or politician that is an AI representation of a politician or collection of politicians. This is the best AI version of our last sort of 20 prime ministers. Why do you need a new one? You've got the best of all the good things you can have, really. And that's hopefully that never happens. But that seems to be a fear that AI could in some way influence our politics in that way. And it's new.
I have a paper coming out any day now on called Slaves to the Algorithms, and it's about oligocracy and liberty. So it's about government by AI. I do think that we are, already heading there. That sort of varying pace, but social security systems now using AI assess your case, or traffic planning and AI, and I think people need to be thinking seriously. I mean, again, about actually what matters here are really old questions. The nature of political liberty and the nature of democracy and what's meant by the rule of law. Part of the community who thinks that a benevolent dictator is the best form of really open to the idea that we would just be governed by AI. But, interestingly, there is a tradition, the Republican tradition, that says even if the dictator is benevolent, there's still a dictator. And the fact that they would mess with you means that you're fundamentally not free. I have some serious concerns about the extent to which people will be able to remain free where government has tools to crack down on dissent so effectively that they are essentially immune to the threat of popular revolution in the future. It can be correct the proofs.
And I look forward to that. But so do you think that and the answer's got to be yes. So, but maybe expand upon it. Do you think AI will have more of an influence on our upcoming elections? Because as you're saying then about obviously at the moment, many countries have democracy, but actually democracies haven't really been around for that long, really. You used to have dictatorships, whether it be in the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Greek Empire, etc. So it's the relatively new thing. And I think a lot of people say democracies are sort of they're the least worst solution. They're not perfect, but they're better than the alternatives. So, but do you think AI will continue to? In the last election we had sort of fake news from Russia, and it feels like that was sort of 4 or 5 years ago. Bloody hell! What are we going to be like at the time of the next presidential election in the US, which is the big one everybody cares about? Yes, Australia's important, the UK is important, but America still has this outweight sort of size of influence on the world. So do you think we'll see more and more AI being used to influence, I guess, both how we think and therefore how we vote, but also more directly the elections themselves?
Look, I do, all who are concerned about the inability of people to tell what's real on video anymore. That's a kind of legitimate fear. I think the kind of micro-targeting AI agent doing sort of push polling, ringing you up and having a conversation with you about your political views. They sound as though they're asking you political views, but in fact they're subtly influencing your politics. I think that that's become possible. I guess one thing I think people should keep in mind here is that there's not like some golden age where elections weren't swayed by people who bought newspapers, their own newspapers, or that the public wasn't duped by some fake telegram or a picture that had been cooked up in a dark room somewhere. So I think, particularly the concerns about foreign influence, you have to think to yourself, okay, yeah, foreign influence is bad, but would it be any better if someone owned Twitter, for instance, or if everyone was getting news from from like three sources that were controlled by billionaires, now trillionaires, who have the power to tweak those algorithms. So it's not, if you care about, to the extent that one cares about democracy, and I do care about democracy. It's not just it's not just a threat from foreign agents. It's also what would it mean to have a democratic society. One thing it's like, simply can't have the inequality of wealth that we have today. You can't have private ownership of the media in the way that we have today. If you have those things, you're incredibly vulnerable to being determined by editorial decisions. Now they would tweak an algorithm, but in the past, all the conservative news would all publish, like a story about an immigrant stabbing someone, for instance. That would go on the front page the morning before the election. It would turn the election. So what's required to live in a genuinely democratic society is not just that, we have better policies around AI. It's that we try to ensure that no one has the kind of social power that is granted by the levels of extreme wealth that we see today, particularly when that allows you to own newspapers, televisions, nations, and social media and empires.
It's interesting. There was a famous headline in the UK when Tony Blair came into power. So Tony Blair had sort of courted Rupert Murdoch for months and months, and finally wanted Rupert Murdoch to sort of steer away from the Conservatives to back the Labour Party in the UK. And the headline after the election, which Tony Blair did win, was the sun what won it. Anyway, very, very terrible headline. But that was literally, so they determined for themselves that influence. And at the time, that paper was read by, it's probably bought by 1 in 10, read by 1 in 4 people in the country. And then he had other titles as well. And then he had the sort of Sky and lots of other news stations and things, and Fox, whatever. So yeah, that influence. Yeah, exactly. You say, it's not just AI that's suddenly doing this. We've had that for a long, long time, going back sort of a century, where people only ever got their news from one radio station and one newspaper, and that was it. Whereas now it's sort of, in a way that access and production of media has been democratized, but it's much, much easier to influence. Exactly as you say, Twitter, X, whatever, that you can put up this algorithm that steer you in a certain direction, and they're so much cleverer now. Well, before, newspapers were very one way. They gave you news, you read it, and that was it. Whereas now, we sort of interact with it, other people comment on it, and you comment on it, all that sort of thing become, much more difficult. Yeah. Well, do you think that we... is there any danger that we hold AI and human relationships to a higher standard than human-to-human relationships? Because it's pretty clear that not all human relationships are good. We have coercive relationships, abusive relationships. Humans tend to start wars with other humans, etc. So it is the danger that we almost put too much onus on an AI-human relationship, and steers away from the fact that actually a lot of human relationships are pretty crappy, really.
So it's, there's always a dual aspect to this question, because at one level, what you have is actually human-human relationship mediated by AI. Like I'm someone who resists the idea that AI is what you would call a moral agent. Okay, which is to say, I don't think that it is responsible for what it does. I don't think we can blame it. I don't think we can jail it or punish it. I don't think our what philosophers call reactive attitudes, which is when you kind of respond emotionally to something that the machine does, they're not the appropriate targets of the reactive attitudes. The machines are not themselves responsible for the things that happen in the course of that relationship. There's a human being or a number of human beings who are responsible for that. Most obviously the designers, sometimes the regulators, sometimes the people who created the data. So when we see, the chatbot that encourages someone to commit suicide, what we should also see is a relationship between an enormous corporation that designed a chatbot, and the human beings all the way through that, and the person who commits suicide. Now, having said that, there is a question about what it means for human beings to design a good tool or design an AI that performs well. And there's a question about what the standard of performance we should require of that machine. And there, actually, interestingly, I think it is actually appropriate to apply a higher standard. Okay, so I have written about this in the context of a debate about whether or not people who are concerned about civilian casualties in wartime should welcome autonomous weapon systems. Okay, so there's a very nice gentleman, Ron Arkin, who was an American engineer heavily involved in the early development of autonomous weapon systems, wrote a book about them. And he was convinced that these things would be good for civilians because he pointed out that human beings, this was kind of, I think Americans were still in Iraq at the time. He pointed out that the performance of human beings when they engaged with Iraqi civilians was terrible because they were scared, they were racist, they were high. And he said, wouldn't a robot that killed fewer civilians? And at one level, it seems absolutely straightforward. But if someone sold you a robot and said, look, this is only going to kill civilians, I don't know, 1 time in 10. And they said, look, that's better than than your human being that kills civilians 1 time in 5. Okay. But now I turn up with a human being. Now I'm a commanding officer. And the orders I give to my troops are, look, those bastards in Battalion B, they're killing civilians 1 time in 3. 1 time in 3. I expect you only to do it 1 time in 4. That's not the order. That's not the order that we give. What we expect of human beings is perfection, even though we know they won't achieve it. You don't tell your son, only run people over. He said, yeah, that's the Maryland. Never run people over. The thing with the machine, I think we should have the same expectation. In a sense, expect perfection of them. The appropriate standard here is they never, they never kill people. They never make mistakes. Now, I'm not sure I'm 100% with that argument, but I do think there is something there. When people say, like, this is a live question with the driverless vehicles. Mm-hmm. Autonomous vehicle, some people think the moment they cause fewer deaths on the road than human drivers, than the average human driver, we should just take the steering wheels of the cars. That would lower the road fault. But they could still be true even if they're much worse drivers than the best human drivers, because the average human driver is well worse, or much worse than the best human driver. And if you put those machines on the road, and they will kill, lower the road toll by half, but you do know that when you license them, they're going to kill that many people. Seems to me, actually, you should think, well, we should demand that they do. How far you take that, I'm not sure. But when someone simply says, look, my machine and my robot surgeon is better than human, and you ask them how many people does it kill? Oh, it'll kill people. But just at a lower rate. I'm not convinced that person has designed a good machine. Yes, there's partially this is a kind of debate about if you're a consequentialist, if you just think it's the outcomes that matter. The moment the robot surgeon outperforms the human surgeon, pulled by an operating table, you just replace all human surgeons. And that's not. If a surgeon came in and killed people, no one going to kill people. But they don't kill as many people as those bastards. Yeah. Right, perfect. You would expect more.
And there's also the way people feel about AI as well. So there was an experiment done. There's lots of experiments done, but people were online talking to a therapist, and they assumed they were talking to a person. At the end of the session, thousands of people, and the 82% of them said they were satisfied and thought it was a good session. They were then told it was an AI they were talking to, and suddenly only 20% of them were happy with the session. Exactly the same. Nothing else changed apart from the fact they thought it was a human, and then they found out no, it was an AI. So the advice was exactly the same, nothing changed, but actually people A, don't like to be deceived, and then B, there is something about that human to human piece that we still have in our psyche, I guess, that we're not able to. And as you say, even though the data might suggest the results are better, it's still something about that. Like you say, we've programmed in a 1% fatality. That's acceptable. Well, first of all, no company is ever going to admit to that. But whereas with a human, if you have a driving test, pass your driving test, the instructor doesn't think, oh, of the 100 people I've just passed, I know one of them is going to kill somebody. Therefore, we won't pass anybody. It just doesn't work that way. It's the way we think about it, I guess.
In the therapist case, I think people care that someone is genuinely listening, and if they learn that from AI, actually, I think it changes the nature of the interaction quite profoundly. I do think the standards we require. There's essentially two senses of expectation that we have when we deal with each. One is moral. What should people, should surgeons kill? None. That's what how many people do you expect them to kill? Like if you're a statistician, actuary or whatever, you'll have a figure for how many people that they keep, and kills. But we need to think carefully about those two senses of expectation and the sorts of circumstances in which it's appropriate just to think, well, the numbers are all that matters here. Or what we people, what you owe the person on the table is not to expose them to an unnecessary risk, or to, and if you already know that the machine you're using has a certain failure rate, and if you have often developed it a bit further, you might be able to improve on that. And maybe that, maybe that risk is unnecessary. Medical ethics is complicated. Ethics of driverless people is complicated. There's more to be said here. But people resort to utilitarian reasoning in these contexts way too quickly, and they don't think about, what we owe each other. They don't think about what it means to relate to someone as someone to whom you owe reasons, and not just outcomes. And interestingly, the machines just fail there utterly. Like the reasons that the machines give you, like now they can justify themselves very fluently, but it's all bullshit. And they don't mean, they don't mean anything that they say.
No.
And so they're not taking you seriously. It's if the government official who's justifying, increasing your rates or, why they're denying your application for titular cancer drug, if you realize that they're just making shit up, they don't care about you at all.
Yeah.
You experience this moment of profound distress that's really unethical. But so often now when we're dealing with a machine, that's all we're getting. They are not taking us seriously because they're not agents. They're not capable of taking anything seriously. The difference between being facetious and being serious is meaningless to these things. So if you start to think through the lens of a Kantian ethics from virtue ethics, some of this stuff looks very different.
You've been super generous with your time. I don't want to keep you all night, but just I do want to ask one more. It's a quick question. I'm not sure it's a quick answer, but it's interesting. It's about my son's got, so in the UK, we have exams at year 11 and year 13. He's got one more exam left in year 11. So he's just in there studying for Spanish writing tomorrow. And you're obviously in the education space at a very different level. But I know you've written about this, but can you expand upon your thoughts about the potential for AI, and I hesitate to use the word, but AI teachers or AI tutors? AI can access all the knowledge. It can create a video teaching. It can create incredible slide expanders, whatever. Why are you very hesitant about employing AI as tutor/teacher?
Yes, well, I have written a book called Bullshit University, the future of automated education. Look, there's more going on in the teaching relationship than just the transmission of content. I guess part of what is going on in an educational relationship is learning what it means to be taken seriously. But like that, I write my essay and somebody reads it and thinks about what I think and takes it seriously. And there's actually something quite profound going on there. I mean, and like so often automation is introduced because we have run the system that we're trying to introduce it to into the ground. For instance, it's not that the education system that I went through or that I taught in before AI was necessarily, always great. But still, there are these moments where you recognize the kind of voice in a student or a kind of insight from a student, or the student felt oh my God, someone actually took me seriously. Someone read what I had to say and engaged with it. Now, the machines don't do any of that. The machine is providing feedback. It's not taking you seriously. It's not, in a sense, it's not responding to you at all. So that moment of what you might call sort of Hegelian recognition, where you come into your own as an agent because the people around you are engaging with you as a source of claims, that's people gone twice with machines. There's the transmission of being someone who cares about this stuff disappears as well. So if you think back to the people who were influential in your own education, often what you remember is not what they taught you, but the way they approached the topic or their persona. They were willing you to stay after class talking about this arcane stuff, really passionate about 17th century science or, the economics of the Malay Peninsula or whatever it is. There's like kind of, and that's one of the things that we need to learn. We need to learn how and why to care about the subject matter. Again, the machines can't do that. There's no role model there. There's the disappearance of just to form relationships
Yeah.
with people at university. I mean, this model of the sort of AI tutor is profoundly socially isolating. You need to talk to other student or to have staff. You're sitting at home talking to machines. You can be sure that the sons and the daughters of the wealthy will still be going to Harvard and MIT. In small groups, people who in the future will be their business partners and professional contacts. The great unwashed will be at Hans in front of them. Google Academy or, whatever. AI tutor. And when they hit the workplace, they'll have no contacts, no experience of dealing with other. I mean, that ability to end up and defend your views to the flask. To sum that with AI, if you're public speaking like that. So I just think this is a really. If you think there are some people who can just learn from books, okay, here's the piece. Here's a library card. Go and educate yourself. Some people genuinely can. Library, amazing things. Most of us can't do that, and we need contact with the human beings. Feel a little bit like the sort of my friends here. Seductive, appears attractive, but actually risks depriving people of the richness of human experience that is actually essential in an educational context or indeed a social one.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm doing my PhD now in philosophy, and the highlight of my time is the face-to-face time with my supervisors, and it's not always the most pleasant experience because they can be quite critical, which is good. But that's what I need. I need somebody there to generally mean, why don't you look at this? What about this? You misunderstood this. Have you not read this? And AI is not going to do that for me. You can give me lots and lots of great sources, lots of references, lots of good places to go and look, but the time I get with sort of Sarah and Dan, I really actually talking to them is that's a valuable part of the education, really. It's not that much. It's, a couple of hours a month, whatever, but it works to keep me wanting to impress them. I don't want to impress the AI, but I want my supervisor to say, the last essay, we thought it was well written. Yes. I want one of those, really. And
that's what you'll remember.
Absolutely.
When, no one's look back and think, wow, had a great interaction with chatbot.
No. So that's my very last question, and you mentioned one of them already. But you are you're very prolific. So what are your research plans for the coming 12 months?
I've got some on military AI sketched out, and I guess the thing I really to be thinking about is how we should respond to sentences from AI. These are deeply sort of alien intelligences, as it were, and there's a live question about whether or not they sort of mean what they say or another. They don't. It says I love you. It doesn't mean, doesn't mean. Or what if it tells you something factual? I think, and I've written about the fact that the machines can't provide testimony, which is to say that they cannot speak with authority about matters. They can, if you tell me something, sometimes I'm justified in believing it simply because you told me that thing. But part of what's going on there, knowing that I can blame you or hold you responsible if you lied to me. For instance, I can't blame the machines. The distinction between truth and falsity doesn't mean what it means for us, if it means anything for them. And, you experience this all the time when you catch them out, you're chatting with board or whatever it is, and it tells you one thing, and then you point out that this is straightforwardly wrong, and just glibly apologize.
Yeah.
There's
I'm sorry that shouldn't happen. When you happen, there's no consequence. There's no consequence to the AI.
Yes, yeah, and that inability the machines to the world of action and agency have implications for the content of what they're saying, because sometimes part of means based word is to commit yourself to certain actions. So if I say, look, by the way, do you realize that your room, the house is on fire?
Mm-hmm.
If someone says that and they're not inclined to leave, they don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
The meaning it's an implication of saying that it's that you're about to flee. Machines can't act them, they can't. That sentence doesn't have the same content for them. But so often what they tell us is so useful. They're all quite reliable in certain contexts. Try and come with that sort of weirdness. The fact that they don't mean anything that they say, that might even mean that the outputs don't have conceptual content, like they're kind of, but in lots of context, I am justified in taking them seriously. That to me is a really interesting set of questions that involves some quite, tricky forces of language, forces of mind, form. That's maybe the next year, trying to work that out.
Well, if you manage to do that in a year, I'm very impressed. But I think the autonomous weapons of things, we get with the US sort of kicking out Anthropic, and then the US just turning off what it wants to turn off and stuff. You do, there's something on that sort of, what is the extent of a governmental authority over a private commercial entity? It does, it's very interesting. We almost have that, and it's too powerful for anybody outside the US. So there's an interesting one today. So one of the lead players at Claude right now is a guy called Rishi Sunak, who was a UK Prime Minister a few years ago. So he now can't use Claude's most developed model. He can't use Fable because the only people that are US citizens are allowed to use it, so Anthropic has now turned it off completely. Then you think, well, but there's something out there that's better than what we already have, but we're just not allowed to use it. It does have lots of odd questions. Yeah. Anyway, so I could keep talking. Sorry. Thank you so much. It's been a real honor to talk to you. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I really enjoy reading your work as well. Actually, it's very accessible, which I hope that's a good thing. It's not it's overly complicated. I can sort of get my head around it a little bit and have it studied a little bit of it. So yeah, I'm fascinated to read what's coming next. But yeah, thank you so much. I'll let you go enjoy your evening.
All right. Opportunity. Nice talking with you. Take care.